Picture this. September 4th, 1957. America is prosperous. Fins are getting higher. Chrome is getting brighter. And Ford Motor Company is about to unveil what they're calling the car of the future. They've spent $250 million developing it. They've built 1,187 brand new dealerships. They've run the most expensive advertising campaign in automotive history. And in just 36 months, it will all be over. The Edsel. Even if you weren't around in 1958, you know that name. It's become synonymous with failure, with miscalculation, with corporate disaster on a scale that makes modern product flops look like rounding errors. But here's what most people don't know. The Edsel didn't fail because it was a bad car. It failed because of 13 critical mistakes that Ford tried desperately to hide. Some of these secrets didn't come out for decades. Some of them Ford executives took to their graves. Let me take you back to a different America. Dwight Eisenhower is president, the economy is booming, and Detroit believes it can sell Americans anything with 4 wheels and enough chrome. Ford's looking at General Motors dominating the market with 5 separate divisions, and they're convinced they need to compete head-to-head in every price bracket. That decision right there, that's where this story really begins. What you're about to hear is the real story of the Edsel disaster, not the sanitized version, not the simplified tale of an ugly car that nobody wanted. I'm talking about corporate politics, sabotaged assembly lines, a transmission system that could destroy itself, and dealers who lost their life savings while Ford executives knew the brand was doomed. These are the 13 secrets Ford never wanted you to know. Secret 1. The name that tested terribly but got chosen anyway. Let's start with something Ford kept quiet for years. They knew the name Edsel was a disaster before they ever used it. Ford hired advertising agencies. They brought in consultants. They even hired the poet Marianne Moore to suggest names. She came back with options like Chaparral, Silver Sword, and Thunder Cresta. The agencies generated over 8,000 possible names. And here's what the market research showed. When people heard the name Edsel, they immediately thought of words like pretzel, weasel, and hard sell. The name tested poorly, consistently, across every demographic. Edsel Ford's own sons, William Clay, Benson, and Henry II, objected to using their father's name. They felt it was disrespectful. They said their father wouldn't have wanted it. But in November 1956, in a meeting of Ford's executive committee, Chairman Ernest Breech got frustrated with the whole process. He said, "Why don't we just call it Edsel?" And that was that. 12 months of work, 8,000 names, all of it thrown out because one executive got impatient. See, Gail Warnock, the public relations director for the new division, wrote a terse memo that day. It said, "We have just lost 200,000 sales." He wasn't wrong. Secret 2, the real loss was $350 million. You've probably heard that the Edsel lost Ford $250 million. That's the number that gets repeated in most histories. But that's not the whole story. The real loss was $350 million. That's equivalent to roughly $3.6 billion in today's money. Think about that for a moment. Ford invested the equivalent of $3.6 billion in a car that lasted 26 months. Where did all that money go? Development costs, manufacturing, retooling, marketing campaigns, dealer setup costs. And here's the part Ford really didn't want anyone talking about. Massive inventory losses when they had to dump unsold Edsels at fire sale prices. The financial impact was devastating. Ford's net income per share dropped from $5.40 in 1957 to $2.12 in 1958. The company cut its dividend from $2.40 to $2. Stock prices plummeted from above $60 to below $40. For a company that had just gone public in January 1956, this was catastrophic. Ford's first major decision as a publicly traded company had turned into its biggest disaster. Secret 3. The infamous grille was actually enlarged against the designer's wishes. Here's something most people don't know, that famous horse collar grille that everyone mocked. That's not what the designer intended. Roy Brown was the chief designer on the Edsel project. His original concept featured a slender, elegant vertical opening in the center of the grille. It was supposed to be refined, distinctive, modern. But then the engineers got involved. They ran cooling tests and determined that Brown's design wouldn't provide enough airflow to the radiator. They insisted it needed to be bigger. Then Ernest Breech, Ford's chairman, saw the revised design and demanded it be made even taller and wider. The result was that vertical oval that journalists immediately compared to a toilet seat, a horse collar, and, less charitably, a part of female anatomy. Time magazine described it as looking like a midwife's view of labor and delivery. The design that killed the Edsel's chances wasn't what the designer wanted. It was what got created through committee decisions and engineering compromises. Roy Brown's career never recovered. He later said that seeing his design get blamed for the Edsel's failure was the lowest point of his professional life. Secret 4. The Teletouch transmission could destroy itself. Let's talk about the Teletouch transmission control system. This was supposed to be revolutionary. Push buttons mounted right in the center of the steering wheel, the future of automotive control. It was a nightmare. Here's the first problem. For decades, the center of the steering wheel had been where drivers expected to find the horn. In emergency situations, drivers would instinctively hit the steering wheel center and accidentally shift gears instead of honking. This caused transmission damage and, in some cases, accidents. But it gets worse. The control wires for the Teletouch system were routed too close to the exhaust manifold. Heat from the exhaust would cause the wires to fail, leading to unpredictable gear changes or complete system failure. And here's the secret Ford really didn't want known. There was one specific sequence that could destroy the transmission. If a driver pressed neutral first, removing hydraulic pressure from the safety inhibitor, and then pressed reverse or park while moving at any significant speed, it would either shear off the parking pole or suddenly lock the rear wheels in reverse. This could cause a catastrophic crash. Ford knew about it. They trained some dealers to warn customers, but they never issued a recall or made the problem public. By 1959, Ford quietly dropped the Teletouch system entirely. They never offered it again. Secret 5. Ford workers deliberately built poor-quality Edsels. Here's one of the darkest secrets of the Edsel disaster. The quality problems weren't just mistakes. Some of them were deliberate. Ford never built dedicated Edsel manufacturing plants. Instead, Edsels were assembled on the same lines as regular Fords and Mercurys. Workers building Fords one moment would suddenly have an Edsel come down the line, requiring different tools, different parts, different procedures. The workers resented it. They saw Edsel as an expensive experiment that made their jobs harder, and many of them didn't hide their feelings. Here's what happened. Workers would have to stop their regular workflow, change out their tools, build the Edsel, then change everything back. It disrupted their rhythm. It made them work longer hours. And it meant they couldn't maintain the same quality standards. But worse than that, some workers actively sabotaged the Edsels. They would intentionally leave parts uninstalled. They would create faulty welds. They would fail to properly seal joints. Dealers started receiving Edsels with notes attached to the steering wheels listing all the parts that weren't installed. Some cars arrived with the missing parts simply thrown in the trunk along with installation instructions. Trunk lids leaked, welds were faulty, power steering failed. These weren't just random quality issues. These were the predictable results of building a car on assembly lines where the workers didn't want to build it. Secret 6. The price gap was only $136. Here's the fatal flaw in Ford's entire strategy. The Edsel was supposed to slot neatly between Ford and Mercury in the market. It was supposed to fill a gap and capture buyers who wanted something more than a Ford but couldn't afford a Mercury. The problem? That gap was exactly $136. $136. That was the difference between the most expensive Ford and the cheapest Mercury. And Ford thought they could fit an entire new brand into that tiny space. It gets worse. When you added options to a Ford, or when Mercury dealers offered discounts, that already tiny gap disappeared entirely. A well-optioned Ford Fairlane could cost more than a base Edsel. A base Mercury could be cheaper than a loaded Edsel. Customers facing this pricing reality did the rational thing. They bought the established brands. Why take a chance on a new, unproven Edsel when you could get a Ford or Mercury for the same price? The Edsel's most direct competition wasn't Buick or Oldsmobile, the brands Ford claimed to target. Its most direct competition was Ford's own products. This is what happens when you let corporate strategy override market reality. Secret 7. The recession started 3 weeks after launch. Ford executives will tell you the Edsel failed because of the recession. That's only half true. The real secret is about timing. The Edsel launched on September 4th, 1957. 3 weeks later, the United States officially entered a recession. Consumer spending on big-ticket items like automobiles collapsed. But here's what Ford doesn't want to talk about. They saw it coming. In the months leading up to E-Day, economists were already warning about economic trouble. The medium-price car market, which had sold 3 million units in 1955, was already contracting. By 1958, it would fall to 1.2 million units. George Romney, president of American Motors, publicly stated in early 1957 that he believed the heyday of the medium-priced car was over. He said Americans wanted smaller, more economical vehicles. Ford executives heard all of this. Robert McNamara, who was vice president of finance at the time, was already pushing for a compact car that would eventually become the Falcon. But Ford had invested too much in the Edsel to stop. They'd committed $250 million. They'd signed up 1,187 dealers. They'd run massive advertising campaigns promising the car of the future. So they launched anyway, knowing the market was turning against them. The 1958 recession destroyed not just Edsel, but also DeSoto, Hudson, Nash, Packard, and Studebaker. Ford knew a storm was coming. They sailed straight into it. Secret 8. Dealers received unfinished cars. Picture yourself as an Edsel dealer in September 1957. You've invested your life savings. You've quit your old job. You've rented showroom space. You're about to sell the car of the future. The transporter arrives. You're excited. You remove the covers from your first Edsels. And there's a note on the steering wheel listing all the parts that aren't installed. This actually happened regularly. In Ford's rush to meet the September 4th launch deadline, they shipped incomplete cars, doors that didn't fit properly, trunks that leaked, power steering systems that failed, paint jobs that showed clear defects, and sometimes just missing parts, trim pieces, interior components, mechanical parts. They'd be thrown in the trunk with a note explaining where they were supposed to go. Ford expected the dealers to finish assembling the cars. Remember, many of these were brand new dealers with no prior experience selling cars. They didn't know how to diagnose problems. They didn't have properly trained mechanics. They didn't have the specialized tools needed for some Edsel-specific components. Customer reports from 1958 paint a clear picture. Faulty welds, leaky trunks, power steering failure, transmission problems, electrical issues. These weren't the normal teething troubles of a new car. These were fundamental quality control failures. And Ford knew. They knew the cars weren't ready. They shipped them anyway because postponing the launch would have meant admitting the whole project was in trouble. Secret 9. McNamara fought to kill it from the beginning. Robert McNamara is one of the most important figures in this story, and his role was kept quiet for years. McNamara was one of the whiz kids Ford hired after World War II. He was brilliant, analytical, and focused on financial efficiency. He looked at the Edsel project and immediately saw problems. From the very beginning, McNamara argued against creating a separate Edsel division. He said Ford didn't need 5 separate sales organizations. He said the mechanical distinctions weren't worth the cost. He objected to the advertising budget. When the Edsel launched and immediately struggled, McNamara didn't try to save it. He tried to kill it. For 1959, he consolidated the Mercury, Edsel, and Lincoln divisions into the MEL division. He forced Edsels to share platforms with Fords, eliminating the unique wheelbase. He slashed the advertising budget to almost nothing. In the fall of 1959, with only 2,846 Edsels built for the 1960 model year, McNamara convinced Henry Ford II and the rest of Ford's management that it was time to pull the plug. On November the 19th, 1959, Ford announced the Edsel was discontinued, effective immediately. McNamara later became Secretary of Defense under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. In the 1964 presidential campaign, Barry Goldwater actually blamed McNamara, still serving in the Johnson administration, for the Edsel's failure. McNamara's response? He pointed out that he was the only Ford executive who tried to stop the disaster before it started. Secret 10. The market research said don't do it. Here's one of the most frustrating secrets about the Edsel disaster. Ford did extensive market research. They spent tens of thousands of dollars. They hired the best consultants, and the research told them not to do it. The studies showed that the medium-priced car market was shrinking, not growing. They showed that consumers were starting to prefer smaller, more economical vehicles. They showed that there wasn't enough differentiation between price brackets to support a new brand. Even the name research, as we discussed earlier, showed that Edsel had negative associations. Ford ignored all of it. Why? Because the decision to create the Edsel wasn't based on market research. It was based on corporate strategy. Ford's leadership looked at General Motors' 5 divisions and decided they needed 5 divisions too. It was a strategic decision in search of market justification, not a market-driven decision. There's an old saying in business, don't ask the barber if you need a haircut. Ford created an entire division and then looked for reasons why they'd made the right decision. By the time the market research clearly showed they hadn't, they'd already invested too much to stop. Secret 11. The 18 model lineup confused everyone. Here's a mistake that seems obvious in hindsight, but made sense to Ford at the time. For 1958, they launched the Edsel with 18 different models. 18, let me break that down for you. 4 series, Ranger, Pacer, Corsair, Citation, multiple body styles, 2-door hardtop, 4-door hardtop, 2-door sedan, 4-door sedan, convertible, and 3 station wagons, Roundup, Villager, Bermuda. The Ranger and Pacer were built on Ford's 118-inch Fairlane chassis. The Corsair and Citation were built on Mercury's 124-inch chassis. Prices ranged from around $2,800 to over $3,500. The problem? Nobody could figure out what the differences were or why they should care. The Ranger and Pacer looked almost identical. The Corsair and Citation looked almost identical. The station wagons were basically rebadged Fords. The only clear distinction was the infamous grille. When customers walked into dealerships, they couldn't understand the product lineup. Dealers couldn't explain it clearly. The differences were subtle trim variations and equipment levels that meant nothing to buyers who just wanted to know what made an Edsel special. Ford cut the lineup to 10 models for 1959. By 1960, they were down to 7. But by then, it was too late. Secret 12. The dealers were abandoned. This is probably the cruelest part of the Edsel story. What happened to the dealers? Ford recruited 1,187 dealers specifically for Edsel. These weren't existing Ford or Mercury dealers who added the Edsel line. These were independent business people who were promised the opportunity to sell the car of the future. Many of them quit stable jobs. They invested their life savings. They signed leases on properties, they hired staff, they ordered tools and equipment, they underwent training, and Ford abandoned them. When Edsel sales collapsed, Ford didn't provide additional marketing support, they didn't offer financial assistance, they didn't help dealers transition to selling other Ford products. By early 1959, dealers were struggling. Many had sold almost no cars. They'd burned through their capital. They were facing bankruptcy. Some dealers added Ford or Mercury lines just to survive. Some went out of business entirely. Some lost everything. And here's the truly brutal part. When Ford announced on November the 19th, 1959, that Edsel was discontinued, many dealers still had unsold inventory. Those cars became nearly worthless overnight. Ford actually issued rebate vouchers worth $300 to $400 to Edsel owners because used values had collapsed so quickly. Think about that. If you were one of the 63,000 people who bought a 1958 Edsel, your car lost more value in 12 months than almost any vehicle in history. If you were a dealer who still had Edsels on your lot, you were ruined. Secret 13. The most valuable Edsel sold for $173,000. Here's the twist ending to this disaster story. Today, Edsels are valuable collector cars. In August 2025, a 1958 Edsel Citation convertible sold at auction for $173,250. Let me put that in perspective. The original price in 1958 was around $3,766. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $33,000 in today's money. This car sold for more than 5 times its inflation-adjusted original value. The rarest Edsel is the 1960 Ranger convertible. Only 76 were built. Of those, approximately 25 survive today. A well-preserved example can command over $100,000. Even more common Edsels, like 1959 Rangers, are selling for $20,000 to $50,000 depending on condition. Why? Because there are only about 6,000 Edsels left in the world, out of the 118,287 that were built. They're rare, they're distinctive, and they represent one of the most fascinating disasters in American industrial history. The Edsel went from being the most famous failure in automotive history to being a sought-after collectible. That transformation took about 30 years. So there you have it. 13 secrets about the Edsel disaster that Ford spent decades trying to downplay or hide entirely. A name they knew would fail. A $350 million loss. A grille enlarged against the designer's wishes. A transmission system that could destroy itself. Workers who deliberately sabotaged assembly. A $136 price gap. A launch timed perfectly for a recession, unfinished cars shipped to dealers, McNamara's campaign to kill it, market research that said don't do it, 18 confusing models, dealers who were abandoned, and the ironic twist that these failures are now worth serious money. The Edsel teaches us something important about American industry. Size doesn't protect you from mistakes, money doesn't guarantee success. And sometimes the biggest disasters come from ignoring the warning signs everyone can see. Ford learned from this. The Ford Mustang, launched in 1964, was everything the Edsel wasn't. Market-driven, clearly positioned, properly timed, and built with quality control, it became one of the most successful car launches in history. The Edsel failed, so the Mustang could succeed. Now, I want to hear from you. Did you or your family own an Edsel? Did you see them when they were new? Do you remember the advertising campaign or the moment Ford pulled the plug? Share your stories in the comments. These cars are part of American history, and your memories matter. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, hit that subscribe button. Click the bell so you don't miss future episodes. And give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new about the Edsel disaster. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.